Hi guys, how are you? In this session, we would study about the Vedic age civilization. In my earlier session, we studied about the Harappan civilization. As I told you earlier that under the proto-historic age, we study about the Harappan civilization and the Vedic age civilization. In this session, we would study about the Vedic age civilization. Vedic age civilization is associated with the civilization of Aryans. The only source for the study of Vedic age is Veda. Veda are four types such as Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sam Veda and Atharva Veda. Rig Veda is the earliest. For the sake of convenience, we can divide the study of Vedic age civilization into two phases. First, the Rig Vedic age civilization and the later Vedic age civilization. In this session, we would try to study about the Rig Vedic age civilization. The only source for the study of the Rig Vedic age civilization is Rig Veda. As I told you, Rig Veda is the earliest, and in the Rig Veda we find descriptions about the life of Aryans. We find descriptions about their social, economic, political, cultural and religious life. The Aryans were not the indigenous people of the Indian subcontinent. They came to India from the Central Asia. Although it's a controversial issue in the history of India, but many scholars regard that the origin of Aryans happened in the Central Asia. That's why many scholars regard that the birthplace of Aryans was Central Asia. The Rig Vedic Aryans were the earliest people who came to India, and they settled in Afghanistan, western frontier region and fringes of western UP. This area was the main area for the habitation of Aryans. We find many descriptions of rivers in the Rig Veda. We find description of Kubha, which is a river of Afghanistan. We find the description of Indus and its 5 tributaries. We also find the description of Saraswati, which has been called Nadittama in the Rig Veda. But the identification of Saraswati is controversial, but many scholars regard that Saraswati is identified with Ghaggar Hakra channel in Rajasthan and Haryana. That's why we can say that the main reason for the settlement of Aryans was the region or the land of seven rivers. That's why the land of Aryans is called Sapt Sandho region, because this region was the land of 7 rivers. When Aryans came to India, one incident happened, and that incident was the struggle, the conflict between the Aryans and the indigenous people of the Indian subcontinent, and also conflict happened among the Aryan tribes too. there was two types of conflicts: inter-tribal conflicts and intra-tribal conflicts. There was confrontations between the Aryans and the indigenous people, and there was also confrontation among the Aryan tribes. The most famous war among the Aryans was the War of 10 Kings. This war happened between Bharatas and a host of 10 kings. Bharata was an Aryan tribe, and our country, Bharatvarsha, was named after this tribe, Bharata. This war happened on the coast of Parushni River, which is coterminous with the Ravi, which is a tributary of Indus. In this war, Bharatas were victorious, and this was the most significant conflict among the Aryans in the Rig Veda. Now we will try to study the social and economic life of Aryans. First of all, we would study about the economic life of Aryans. The Aryans were agriculturists and animal rearers. The Aryans were familiar with many types of farming. They were familiar with sowing, harvesting, irrigating, etc. We find various evidences in the Rig Veda. The Aryans were familiar with cropping. They were familiar with many techniques of agriculture. They were familiar with many techniques of farming, and they sowed wheat, barley, etc. Moreover, the Aryans domesticated many animals such as cow, bull. Cow was the most significant animal in the Vedic age civilization. We find mention of cow many times in the Rig Veda. Various significant things are named after cow in the Rig Veda, such as Gavasthi is used for war in the Rig Veda. Wars happened over the issue of cow at that time. Cow was regarded a type of wealth in the Rig Veda. In the Rig Vedic age civilization, the landed property didn't develop. The people didn't have land as property. They had cow as property. Moreover, cow was given as gifts, and we find various mentions related to the cow. That's why cow had significant place in the Rig Veda. We also found mentions of various other animals in the Rig Veda too. Actually, the economy of Rig Vedic Aryans was a pastoral economy, and the Aryans were the tribal people, and they were not mainly agriculturists, although they exercised agriculture, but they were originally the pastoral tribes, and they domesticated animals for the sake of livelihood. But we find evidences of agriculture in the Rig Vedic period on very small scale. That's why we can say that Aryan economy was a pastoral economy. We also find mentions of various crafts in the Rig Vedic period. We find mentions of carpenter, chariot making, and leather works, etc. That's why we can imagine that these crafts had developed in the Rig Vedic period. Now we will try to study about the political life of the Vedic Aryans. In the Rig Vedic period, there was not a systematic development of political life of the Rig Vedic people. We find mention of Rajan in the Rig Vedic period, which was the chief of tribe, and he led the tribe in the war, and he was as a leader of the tribe. We find no systematic arrangement regarding the political life and administration. The Aryans were in the initial stage of their political life. There was no concept of empire. The king was only the leader of his tribe, and there was not the concept of empire, and there was not a systematic concept of king, and he was a type of leader for the sake of leading in the war. We find various mentions of assemblies such as Sabha, Samiti, Bidhat, and Gana. The king was selected by Samiti, and the king always tried to get the favor of these assemblies. That's why we can say that in the political life of the Aryans, these assemblies played significant role. Although there was no systematic administration in the Rig Vedic period, yet we find evidences of various functionaries in the Rig Veda. We find the mention of priest. The priest was associated with worship. He was the chief priest of the tribe, and he was responsible for carrying out worship and other things in the Rig Vedic period. We find evidences of Vasistha and Vishwamitra as priests. Vasistha was a conservative priest, while Vishwamitra was a liberal priest. Vishwamitra composed Gayatri Mantra, which is found in Rig Veda, and women and Sudras were not allowed to recite Gayatri Mantras. That's why we can say that Vishwamitra was a liberal priest. Next functionary was Senapati. Senapati was the chief of war. He was next to the king or Rajana, and he was also responsible for war, and he played significant role in war. Next functionary was Vrajpati. Vrajpati was the chief of horses. As I told you earlier that the Aryans used horses and chariots in war. That's why another animal, horse, played significant role in the life of Aryans, and that's why a significant functionary was appointed by the name of Vrajpati in the Rig Vedic period. Next functionary was Gramin or Gramadi. He was responsible for the administration of Grama, which was a cluster of various units, and it was the lowest unit of administration. Gramani was a significant functionary in the Rig Vedic period. Now we will try to study about the social life of Aryans. Kinship played significant role in the life of Aryans. All the social system developed on the basis of kinship. The Aryans were the people of social customs and traditions. They played significant role in their social life. We find evidences of joint family in the Rig Vedic period, and the father was the head of the family. In the Rig Vedic period, the society was a patriarchal society, and the father was responsible for the whole family. We found evidences of vast families in the Rig Vedic period. We find evidences of husband, wife, sons, mother, sisters, etc. All the family members were compelled to follow the orders of the head of the family, and we find evidences of a stratification of society in the Rig Vedic period too. We find three types of varnas or three types of communities in the Rig Vedic period. Although we find the mention of varna in the Rig Vedic period, but it was related to color. The Aryans were fair in complexion, but the indigenous people were dark in complexion. That's why color or varna was used in the Rig Veda. But we find evidences of three types of social groups or communities in the Rig Veda. First group was the group of warriors. The first community was the group of warriors or the community of warriors. This community was responsible for war. The next community was the community of priests. This community was responsible for worship, and the third community was of common people. We do not find mention of Sudras in Rig Veda. We find mention of Sudra in 10th mandal of the Rig Veda, but the 10th mandal is the latest addition, and that's why we do not find mention Shudras in the Rig Vedic period. The addition of 10th mandal in the Rig Veda was at the time of later Vedic period. Under Rig Veda, 1st and 10th mandal, which is book, 1st and 10th book are the latest additions, and from 2nd to 7th are the oldest editions. That's why we consider only from 1st and 7th mandal in the Rig Veda, in the Rig Vedic period. That's why we can say that Sudra had no existence in the Rig Vedic period. The 3 types of communities are found in the Rig Vedic period. Those are the warriors, the priests, and the common people. Now we would study about the religious life of the Aryans. The Aryans found their gods in their surroundings. The Aryans were surprised at the natural events happening in nature. They were surprised at sun, moon, rains, mountains, rivers, etc. That's why they personified them as gods. The most significant god in the Rig Vedic period was Indra. We find 250 hymns about Indra in the Rig Veda. This god was a rain god. This god was responsible for rains in the Rig Vedic period. Moreover, Indra was a war god, and we find the term Purandar for Indra in the Rig Veda. The meaning of Purandar is the destroyer of dwelling units. The god Indra led to the victory of Aryans in the Rig Vedic period. The second significant god was Varuna. It was a water god, and it established natural law in the society. We find mentions of Maruts, who were gods of